this is the biggest existential threat to the United States. It isn't China, it isn't ISIS or something else. It is our failure to control our spending.
Hey everyone, Will Berger with Americans for Prosperity here, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Congressman Andy Biggs from the great state of Arizona and Kurt Couchman, Senior Fellow of Fiscal Policy at Americans for Prosperity, and we are in Cannon House Office Building, the Congressman's office here, and we're going to be talking today about balanced budget amendments. So, Congressman, I want to start with you. Recently, you had the privilege of getting your balanced budget amendment marked up in the House Judiciary Committee. I think this is interesting because it comes on the heels of what has largely been an affordability crisis, a cost of living crisis over the last couple of years in America. It's harder and harder to put food on the table, economic uncertainty all over the place. How does a balanced budget amendment address some of these monumental fiscal challenges?
Well, a lot of people don't realize how much influence the federal spending level and the debt and the deficit has on the cost of goods. But what we spend here, which is out of control, actually helps generate inflation. And so that helps send costs up. And so when we do a balanced budget amendment, the idea is, of course, to constrain the spending of the federal government, get it back to balance. And so we're not going to be crowding out money-wise from the regular economy, from everybody else, all the other consumers, because of the huge role that the federal spending plays.
Right. A lot of people, myself included, am not super familiar with the process, at least up until recently. But a balanced budget amendment is just that. It's an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and that's only happened 27 times in our country's history. Why this format for tackling our federal fiscal issues?
Because the people in Congress, this is really important to understand, the people in Congress, we have rules and we have statutes that we routinely waive and ignore. It is a lot harder to ignore the U.S. Constitution. And the other thing is, if you have a constitutional prescription or order on how you're going to spend your money and make it balanced, if Congress doesn't do that, if the executive branch doesn't do that, we are subject to lawsuits by those who might have standing to raise that issue and take it right up to the Supreme Court. And so it will actually be, in my opinion, a very strong fiscal constraint on Congress, and that's why you need it.
Wonderful, yeah. I know, Kurt, you've worked a lot on balanced budget amendments in your career. You've been a staffer on the Hill for a number of members. You've worked for a number of organizations. You are also the author of a recently released book, Fiscal Democracy, How a Balanced Budget Amendment Can Restore Sound Governments. Fill us in on one, why does and how does AFP care about budget, and what is AFP working on in the budget space? And also, when did you start caring about balanced budget amendments and why?
Well, my background in budgeting really starts with the balanced budget, amazingly enough. It goes back to the Tea Party era, about 2010, and there was all this talk about we need a balanced budget. And so I went to go look at the ones that had been introduced in the last couple of Congresses, hoping to find the best one that we could champion. I was at a think tank at the time. And when I went and looked at them, I realized there were a lot of similarities, and they all had similar problems. And so I wanted to see if there was a better way of approaching balanced budgets, and the story is told in the book. And actually, the idea that we should balance the budget on an annual basis is not a good idea. We should balance over the business cycle, exactly like what Representative Biggs's proposal would do. Because revenue is just so volatile, it jumps around all the time. You don't want to have that much uncertainty, that much unpredictability, that much instability applied to both your spending and your revenue policies. You want to give the people something that they can count on. Now, AFP, we work in all the states as well as the federal government. And what we've seen is that states that budget better deliver better value for the people that they serve. The budget is supposed to be the hub of fiscal democracy. Like, that's where you decide how much of this, how much of that. And also you have challenge conversations about, is this really appropriate for us to be doing? So it really is the hub of all policymaking, because that's where you get the resources, divvied out, and then you can do your authorizing, your programmatic legislation around that as well. But it's about exactly the things that the representative talked about. Right now, the out-of-control federal spending is driving inflation. That's pushing up interest rates. The debt is such a burden now that it is stealing from the private sector and undermining our growth. We're entering a period of stagflation because of the ridiculous debt burden that we're facing right now.
As somebody who is not an expert on BBAs, there's a lot of different types of balanced budget amendments out there. Congressman, I'd love to hear what makes yours unique, and why did you land on that type, and how do you see the process playing?
Well, so every state except for one has balanced budget constitutional constraints, and we get to see that. You can look and see how they've worked out. Like Arizona's, if you don't balance at the end of a year, because they use a year model, then you either have to raise taxes or cut spending within 30 days, right? That's pretty effective, but it's a much smaller budget, right? Our budget, as you mentioned, I mean, this is massive, and the revenue comes really a lot sometimes. It's volatile, it's unpredictable in many ways. So we've tried to, in this particular BBA, we've tried to actually feather it out so you actually have a period of time to make the necessary adjustments by the cycles, by the business cycles and the fiscal cycles. So that makes it unique. I think it makes it much more rational, and quite frankly, it is the closest I think we can come to the best type of balanced budget. I would like to see it. If you did it on an annual basis, man, that really does constrain you, but it's almost impossible. So I think this is a much more possible a way to do this, and that's why we went with this.
Where do you see it going from here? Is there the possibility that it would get a floor vote on the House of Representatives?
I am told we're going to get a floor vote. I'm not optimistic that the Democrats will join us. I mean, look, in 1997, you had, I think, 70, 80 Democrats actually vote for a balanced budget. And then over the years, you've had various Democrats who've come along and said, we want a balanced budget, and they were willing to negotiate. And even 4 or 5 years ago, we did. But if the Judiciary Committee hearing is any example of that, they don't even want to talk about balancing the budget right now.
Yeah. Well, what could be more important, Kurt? If a balanced budget amendment process, if it was to come to the floor, what could that process look like? What would you say is the best way to approach that?
Yeah, there are a couple of different models. In 2018 and 2011, when balanced budget amendment proposals came to the floor, it was through a modified version of suspension of the rules, where it's just it takes 2/3 of members to approve something, which is what it is for a constitutional amendment, and a little bit longer than the normal 40 minutes for debate. One thing that I found when I went back and looked at the 1995 process is that it actually had competition between different proposals, and that might have been the secret sauce that helped the House get a BBA passed for the first and only time. It was a 300 to 132 vote in the House, so that's a little bit more than the 2/3 threshold of 290 if everybody's there. And there were a couple of things going on. One, there was bipartisan support for a balanced budget constitutional rule going back to when they first came up in the 1930s. So a long period of bipartisan work on that. But it was also the competition. The Judiciary Committee marked up an annual balanced BBA, made it a conservative one. That went to the floor as the first substitute amendment, and then there were a series of progressive BBA proposals. And then the last substitute amendment was essentially the consensus BBA that was able to pass. And so by letting people vote for ones that they preferred, it sort of freed them up to vote for the one that almost a lot of people thought would be at least a significant upgrade for the country. So it might be that when hopefully when
Yeah.
the BBA votes come to the floor, there could be an opportunity to say, well, okay, what about this provision? What about that provision? And for members to see, which ones they like the best and why, and have that debate and that discovery process that a legislature is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, and I think that there is an opportunity. It's possible, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take people like me sitting down with Democrat leadership and trying to pitch this thing and find out what are you willing to do. A lot of people forget that the concern over the threat of our national debt and our deficit has been a bipartisan, recognized on a bipartisan basis, literally for decades, where you had, national defense leaders come out and say, this is the biggest existential threat to the United States. It isn't China, it isn't ISIS or something else. It is our failure to control our spending, because it can drive you right into hyperinflation, number one. Number two, it could actually squeeze out, as I was talking about, crowding out spending on things like military and defense spending or national security issues, along with other programs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing, in my opinion, more bipartisan than this monumental challenge that we're facing, and it's really going to be working together that's going to get us out of this. You have been remarkably consistent in your long career, focusing on fiscal issues, calling out the fiscal warning signs out there. What has surprised you most in your time working up here that most people probably wouldn't know or understand?
Well, quite frankly, I think it's been, when I first got here even, we could actually have the conversation. And so this is 10 years ago when I first got here. Now, as I'm trying to make clear, is it's very difficult to even have the conversation on spending. In other words, this complacency, this acquiescence with this out of control spending and imbalanced budget that we have. Nobody wants to talk about it because it requires tough political discussions. When Kurt was talking about when you have a balanced budget amendment in the states, it causes these discussions to take place. Well, when I served in the legislature, we would have those hard discussions like, should we do this? This may even be constitutional, but can we afford to do it? But here, the solution to every problem is throw more money at it. And just to give you an idea, the first bill I ever voted no on here, when I got here in 2017, was a bill to fund $30 million for an agency to tell us what agencies were duplicative and wasteful. And I thought that's what Congress did. I mean, that's what oversight in Congress is. We don't need a separate $30 million a year agency to do that. We could probably hold a hearing or two on that and get people to come in and get an idea. And so that's been the biggest surprise, is this absolute reticence to even talk about it, much less to seriously do something about it.
Right. I mean, it seems like there's another problem, which is that there's a lot, it's almost like its own language up here. And sometimes, especially as staffers, we can forget what it's like to have to translate this to everybody back home. And so, Kurt, what has been the biggest challenge? What would you like to communicate about the federal fiscal challenges that you've seen, and why does tackling them matter for everybody sitting around just wondering how to make ends meet?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the federal government is not immune to the laws of economics, of reality, of nature itself. We have a large and growing debt burden. It is already causing problems. And if Congress doesn't get a hold of it, the problems are going to escalate, and not like a little bit, a lot. It could be really bad very fast. We don't know when that tipping point could be. So the hope is that we can get a constitutional balance rule, which in itself would pressure Congress to be more responsible. It would also push Congress to fix itself. Congress is not the highly effective deliberative body that it was supposed to be, but it could be. I mean, there are a lot of examples from the states that show us how legislatures can work. So we need to take those lessons, figure out how to adjust them to make them work for Congress, get Congress to adopt them, and then we can actually have a federal government that is doing what it's supposed to constitutionally, and not do other stuff, provide a lot more value, avoid a crisis, have real fiscal democracy, and also, by the federal government getting out of the way, let states experiment, be the laboratories of democracy to figure out the best ways of serving people. I think there's two things that people really need to know. First of all, a balanced budget amendment is not a wild and crazy idea. We are one of the very few rich countries that doesn't have one. As the congressman mentioned, 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget rule. Most of them are constitutional. A lot of them are constitutional and statutory, which is ideal. You need the implementing legislation for all the details. So it's a totally normal thing, but we're just not doing it here. And the other thing is that Congress doesn't really have an integrated spending approach, right? Appropriations, like everybody's talking about, is 12 bills that are, the smallest one is like, what, $7 or $8 billion? And the largest one is 100 times that. It's crazy. But it's only a quarter of spending and none of the revenue. And there's all this, you can call it spending through the tax code. It's $1 to $2 trillion per year, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody's looking at it. The budget process doesn't include it. So we need to have a real budget up here to be able to meet budget goals, balanced budget goals. And also just to let members of Congress shine as legislators and actually solve problems.
Congressman, we were talking about that before we got going this morning. Yeah. You were mentioning the same exact thing.
Yeah, that's right. And you don't even they'll come and they'll say this is mandatory spending, this is discretionary spending, and then there's this whole bucket over here that you really don't ever see. So not only does the American public not know what's going on, many in Congress don't know what's going on. Most of the time, these budgets are negotiated between what they call the cardinals of the Appropriations Committee, and then you'll have the Speaker and the Minority Leader and the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader. They'll get together in some room and kind of hash out what it is, but they don't know what's going on. It's the staffers that are driving this. So if you want to know what's happening, I've sat in rooms where we're asking questions, and they turn it over to the staffer, because the staffer is the one that's come up with the idea. The staffer is the one that's defending the idea. The staffer is the one that understands the idea, and the rest of us are all running behind it. When you have a balanced budget amendment, it will change the actual structure, I think, of the United States Congress to get it back to where it was supposed to be, which is the House is the people's house. We're supposed to originate the budgets, and the Senate's supposed to do their deal on it, and then we have a conference committee and work this thing out. That's not happening now. So when Kurt was talking about 12 appropriations bills, first of all, they don't cover everything. Mm-hmm. Second of all, that goes back to, I think it's the 1972 Budget Control and Impound Act, or Impact Control and Budget Act. The last time Congress actually did that exactly the way the law was designed was 1976.
Wow.
And so that's why we have a mess, and that's why it's going to be hard to get going and fix it unless you get to a balanced budget amendment, because then all of a sudden everybody has to be here. They have to say, I'm going to set aside my own little pet project over here, because we have to make big decisions on what's going on. And then you also have to be able to go out and articulate that to the constituents, and the American people will then see what's happening, they'll understand it, and I think they'll come to trust government better. Without this balanced budget amendment, I think the mistrust in government is going to continue, because you don't know where your money's going, and it's hard to understand why the price of beef in Arizona is really high. We're a cattle growing state, but somehow the price of beef's high. And all of those things that come back right to the kitchen table originate, in my opinion, because of the profligate spending of the federal government.
Well, I think that is a wonderful spot to end on. I appreciate both of you gentlemen for being here today. Thank you for your time, Congressman. Thanks for the use of your office. And We appreciate the work that you're doing, and continue to fight the good fight.
I'll do it. Thank you. You guys keep fighting too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.